Okay, I am getting ready to introduce you to the next keynote talk, which we're going to actually do in the form of a fireside chat. We are incredibly fortunate today to have with us two key leaders from the United States Navy's Special Warfare Command. So for those of you that aren't used to working with the military, the U.S. Naval Special Warfare Command, which is also known as WARCOM, is the naval component of the United States Special Operations Command, responsible for overseeing and conducting the Navy's Special Operations Forces. So these forces will include 8 U.S. Navy SEAL teams, 3 special boat teams, and these teams are tasked with conducting counterterrorism, hostage rescue and recovery, counter weapons of mass destruction, and irregular warfare, along with other special operations and campaigns to protect and advance U.S. policies and objectives. So in a nutshell, think high-risk missions for very high-reward outcomes. So for our first guest, I'm super excited to introduce Rear Admiral Keith Davids, the commander of WARCOM. He's a native of Miami, Florida, and Admiral Davids is a Naval Special Warfare Officer, 1990 graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy. He earned a Master of Science in Manpower Systems Analysis in 1998 from the Naval Postgraduate School, Master of Science in National Security Strategy from the National War College in 2012. Rear Admiral Davids has made numerous operational deployments to Iraq, Afghanistan, the Pacific, and Europe. He's completed multiple operational and shore tours to include platoon commander at SEAL Team 2, commander of the Combined Joint Special Operations Task Force Iraq, and military aide to the president. His shore commands include Naval Special Warfare Center and deputy commander of Naval Special Warfare Command. Rear Admiral Davids most recently served as commander of Special Operations Command South, smallest startups to the largest technology companies. He's led, selected, or advised innovation in a variety of environments, from tiny, under-resourced startup teams or university labs, all the way up to $100 million internal startup projects inside large and complex organizations. So as you can see, he's clearly passionate about finding great small teams and helping them accomplish uncommon results. So gentlemen, welcome to DARPA Forward.
Thank you.
Okay. We were really excited to have a chance to sit down with you both today, learn a little bit more about the challenges that you face, and your perspectives on the role of technology and innovation in addressing those different challenges. As always, we encourage the audience to engage and ask questions via our virtual event platform. You should be really good at this by now. I'm using the QR code on the screen. But to get us started, I got a couple of questions, and so we'll warm up with those. So we'll start with a softball. What are some of the challenges that our Naval Special Operations Forces will be facing in the future operating environment?
Yeah, thank you. And thanks. Pleasure to be here with you and everybody today. Yeah, thank you for the softball. The last 20 plus years, I think Naval Special Warfare, my Force Master Chief likes to say we've had an addiction to dirt. We spent a lot of time, your naval commandos have spent some time in the desert and the mountains, because I think it's what the nation needed us to do with Al-Qaeda and ISIS. We have spent a lot of energy in the past focused on going after and defeating networks. I think what the future looks like, probably different future threats, and we're trying to reorient towards operating in more denied environments. Right? We have maneuvered with a bit of impunity. I joke with my Navy teammates, we've had a long off season in terms of the fact that we've been able to go pretty much anywhere around the world unimpeded. Our ships, our aircraft, in fact, it's hard for me to imagine operating in an environment without a gunship overhead or whatever it might be, bombs on call. And I don't know that that's going to be the operating environment we have in the future. So we're really thinking about how do we operate maybe in areas that are more denied. Maybe we're concerned about our signatures. Different communications, where that might be more challenged. We have relied heavily on GPS. What happens if that's denied to us? So I think those are, in a very broad way, the way we're thinking about a future environment.
Exactly. I think the audience got a great introduction to this yesterday when they were talking about the battlefield of the future for medicine, right? And the whole idea of how you evacuate casualties and what you can do is completely different.
Right.
And so, yeah, this is a good time for you all to be sort of thinking about what's coming next and how you can help in terms of solving problems. So are there ways in which SOCOM or WARCOM are already addressing some of these hard problems that you can share with us?
No, yes, ma'am. We're on a journey. I don't think we have it all figured out yet, but SOCOM and certainly WARCOM is spending a lot of calories thinking about, are we invested in the right things? Are we focused on the right technologies? I personally am looking for those technologies and capabilities that will provide us sort of asymmetric advantage. We're a relatively small force. It turns out people are expensive, and we are looking for ways in a relatively small force to develop ways, leverage technology to scale our effects.
Right.
Right? How do we have a big impact with relatively small, lean, lethal force? I'll jump in with one that's of particular interest to me. I got some exposure to this my last tour in Central and South America, and that's using artificial intelligence and some basic machine learning and algorithms to help understand what some of maybe our security threats, what people are up to. I'll try and leave it in a broad way. But I saw the power of algorithms and information. I'll try and give you a hard example. I had let's say a 25-person intelligence team that I would argue was outperforming a 750-person intelligence team through sort of man-machine teaming, using commercial data and other data sources, and the benefit of using algorithms to identify maybe some of what our competitors are doing and what they're up to. So it was just a different way of thinking about and understanding some of the national security threats.
Oh, absolutely. And this kind of an example really fits to, I think, some of what Eugene is focusing on, right, in terms of specializing. Are there things from the commercial world or other things like that, given this level of asymmetry in open source that you might want to comment on?
Yeah, thank you. I think one of the amazing things is that for me, who's new to the DoD, and all of my experience was in the private sector and academia before this, the immediacy of impact that we can have with technology, with algorithms, with AI, is really unprecedented, and the mission is the one that really matters for the nation. And it's very unevenly distributed, this technology. Sort of the future is already here, but it's not everywhere in the DoD. And so there's a lot of opportunity to bring in best practices from the private sector, even relatively simple things like, DevSecOps and feature engineering for AI and so on, and implement them at WARCOM and elsewhere at SOCOM. And then in other cases, you have some talent and, again, problems and data sets that you could never get in the private sector. So you actually can make some breakthrough in technology that you actually couldn't do even if you had 10 years in a purely university or private sector setting.
Right. Well, that kind of leads naturally to the next question. So for all of the folks who've never worked with special operations before, you've worked with traditional DoD, you're used to a very long slog and a very process-defined system of budgeting and acquisition. Just for the sake of the audience as a whole, can you describe a little bit about what makes WARCOM a unique partner for technology and acquisitions?
I'll take a first swing. I think that we are blessed. I'm admittedly biased, but I think we attract some really capable action sort of people with a bias towards action. And so there's this constant tension in the Department of Defense between the bureaucracy and this profession of arms. And I think we tend to get people that really want to make an impact. So I think we are, like I said, we're a relatively small force. We're pretty agile. We are also blessed with being assigned significant operational problems. So we operate sort of with a sense of urgency and purpose that, I think is a little bit unique. But that urgency, I think, drives, to your point, rapid innovation, and a sense of need.
Absolutely. Well, I know well, first of all, you're allowed to be biased. We have been doing nothing but saying DARPA, 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 right, for the last day and a half. So we and our folks love working with your organization, and they really thrive on that high risk, willingness to take chances and just focus on the mission kind of an attitude. Anything you wanted to add to that, Eugene?
I think the other thing that may not be obvious to everyone is that Naval Special Warfare has been doing a lot of advanced technology for a long time, some of it in partnership with DARPA, some of it with other organizations. And so it's a force that is very technologically sophisticated. I work with a number of naval officers that sort of write code, and by the way, they're special operators. It's kind of an amazing organization that way. And so if you look at something like unmanned systems, that's something that NSW has been really in the lead for the DoD for decades. So that makes it, it's another way that it makes it a very good partner, that you actually have technologists on the other side that you can partner with and brainstorm solutions on and adjust things and then transition them quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we have our first audience question, and the audience would like to know, are there particular mission types that give you the biggest concern about how they might be conducted in the future?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think mission types, I guess I would tell you, for a long time we have been what we call the supported command. In other words, we have been, other organizations, conventional forces have been supporting our counterterrorism missions. Broadly, the missions we're looking at, I think that the highest impact going forward, we're always going to have the counterterrorism threat that unfortunately probably never goes away. But where we're really spending calories now is trying to figure out how we can best enable the Navy and the Joint Force conventional mission through unconventional means.
Right.
And a lot of that has to do with how do we go places maybe where no one else can go. And there's a range of technologies that can help us get there. Some of it's power generation, right? New battery technology that helps extend our reach, whether that's in the air, on the surface, maybe undersurface. But just extending our reach in places where, because of new and developing threat technologies, our partners can't go.
Absolutely. We've been hearing a lot about batteries, the need for batteries. So if you all haven't taken that, I feel like I should stop my foot, right? So in GPS-denied environments, are you most concerned about, this is kind of an unfair question because you might have to pick which thing you're most worried about, but more concerned about navigation or communications? And both is probably a totally fair answer.
I think it is a both. We have developed an addiction to GPS enablement, both in terms of navigation and communication. So I think we're interested in solving both problems. I don't know that if give me a mission set, I'll prioritize.
Sure.
But the reality is we need both of those things.
Yeah. Well, it's a hot topic, and it's another hot topic of conversation. How do you? Well, first, do you envision space assets contributing to the fight? And if you do, how might that work?
Yeah. So, sort of tied to the last question a little bit in some regards. We're actually talking right now this concepts about soft special operations forces, cyber, and space. And what does a day without space look like? It's not a great day for us. So the short answer is yes. And there's an enabling dimension. There's also a denying and degrading potential adversary dimension to it. So I don't want to get too deeply in that rabbit hole, but absolutely critical.
Sure. So we specifically, we've had some very specific questions about things like GPS denial and navigation, communications, and space. So I'm just going to throw it out to both of you to see, is there a topic that the audience hasn't asked about along those lines that we should highlight before we get on to this next audience question?
I think low observability in general is very important.
Okay.
The element of surprise in special operations is key. So whether it's, electromagnetic signatures, radar cross sections, all of those other things that you can kind of imagine of the stealth technologies that DARPA had such a big role in pioneering. Now imagine extending that to individual operators or other gear that may be out there. So I think that's one important thing that we haven't talked about.
Okay.
I would add, if I may,
Please.
When I think about, many of you are probably familiar with Colonel Boyd and the OODA loop, right? Observe, orient, decide, act. And I would argue we have, for decades now, had significant advantage in the observing and orienting dimension. I think what's going to matter in the years to come is what will be decisive is decision advantage. And we are now flooded with different information streams, and trying to make sense of the noise, the different signals, but understanding competitor or adversarial intent, and I think this is an area where it will prove decisive. Right. So decision tools, technology that helps us understand, I think incredibly important.
Absolutely. So let me see. Audience would like to know what new, well, I think we've talked about parts of this, so this is a good chance to kind of dive in on specific things that you see promise in. What new technological areas could be the most important to special operator success as we transition towards that near-peer conflict? So feel free to elaborate on or highlight, some of the things you've already touched on.
Well, I'll jump in and I'll maybe tee up Eugene, who can talk much more eloquently than I. But we're looking hard at robotic systems, unmanned systems. We have a lot of experience in naval special warfare flying unmanned drones. But you think about, depending on your drone, it might take 20 or 30 people to launch and operate and maintain a drone. We're trying to use technology and AI in particular, so that maybe one person can fly 30 drones, right? Again, it goes back to the discussion when we started with how do we scale effects, particularly if we want to maintain a low signature, we don't want to put a lot of people potentially forward in harm's way. And by the way, people are, like I said, expensive. I think that's one of the challenging areas we're working on, scaling effects and using robotics and AI.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, and I think a lot of the work that's happening out there is very exciting in terms of multi-domain uncrewed systems. One of the other things about NSW is, of course, uncrewed air systems, surface vessels, and autonomous undersea vessels. So, finding ways where they can swarm, where they can collaborate, again, in an environment where you want them to be not particularly detectable, and you may have these issues of denial of dominance in the electromagnetic spectrum. That's a lot of what we're focused on. A lot of that, of course, has to do with autonomy and artificial intelligence, without kind of getting into more sensitive topics. And we think that that's very, very important. And ultimately, the way that I think about it, it's sort of obvious, but it's a good reminder, for those of us that are engineers and passionate about hard problems, is that near-peer competition is necessarily a technology competition. And it's whether it's open conflict or it's just the kind of integrated deterrence that we talk about in the DoD, it's about technology competition. And so in some ways, DARPA and engineers and scientists and the university community are more important than ever, whether it's about making better robots or communications or navigation.
Oh, absolutely. And one thing, again, for a lot of the folks who aren't familiar with DoD or working with DARPA, I know people can get really intimidated by not understanding, intimately the nature of some of these challenges. There are plenty of, commercial and civilian analogs that you can think about. Imagine a natural disaster, where you just don't have the resources, you don't have the time. You may not have to be worried so much about low observability, but almost everything else that folks are dealing with, you'll be dealing with similar things. So put yourself in that space. Think about how you might solve some of those problems. And I suspect these are things that Warcom and folks like that would love to hear more about ideas. So we're going to change direction a little bit because we've got a great question here focusing on brain health. Special forces operators. So what are some of the what are you doing to improve that? And what are some of the challenges in this area?
Yeah, it's an important question. A couple things, and this is an area where actually DARPA's helped us with the helmet and measuring overpressure, blasts, and that sort of thing.
Right, the blast gauge.
I think we've understood. We've learned a lot, unfortunately, about TBIs. I think relatively new, and we're still learning, is an appreciation for the cumulative effect of even small overpressure. So, we've seen it's almost like cumulative scarring where I might be an instructor and I might be out shooting, rockets at Carl Gustav or whatever it might be, and these microblasts. We think about the big IED or something, but even the micro overpressures from shooting rockets and those sorts of things, we're learning has a cumulative effect. It's a super important question. So, what's the challenge? The challenge is we still have a tough job to do. People still need training. So where do you strike that balance? We're baselining folks now, so we have a better understanding of where they are when you come into the service, so we can sort of try and track that over time.
Yeah, I think that's been a tremendous area of learning, but we're maybe not quite yet in problem solving in that TBI space. Now, at one of our previous DARPA Forward events, we had a really fascinating conversation on things like sleep deprivation and stress and things like that. Maybe for a different aspect of that brain health, are there things in those areas that you think about or worry about, or is that sort of well mastered by well-trained operators?
I don't know that it's mastered. We've certainly spent some energy thinking about it, but I wouldn't say we're mastered.
Well, this is kind of fun. What's an example of a generational change to special warfare technology from when you first started in your career?
Okay, great
Besides
question.
the iPhone.
Well, maybe I can tie in an iPhone and your last comment about, maybe what technology and also disaster relief and that sort of thing. So I'll give you an example. We've been conditioned. Used to be we had overhead satellite imagery that was grainy or whatever. I'm dating myself a little bit here.
Me too.
And then we got a little bit of addiction to drones and planes with cameras. I was actually asked to lead the recovery response effort to help out with the earthquake in Haiti last year. And because we're so conditioned, the first question you always ask in a disaster is, how bad is it? What's the extent of the damage? So our natural reaction is to try and launch planes. But then we thought, well, wait a minute, I could actually crowdsource for that intelligence, right? I could probably give out free minutes if someone would go and take their iPhone and do a geotag of the mudslide or and so it's just, again, the technology's out there, but we're still, I think, training our own way of thinking about using the various information sources.
Okay. Yeah, that is something I think we've heard also from folks who live kind of in that natural, the FEMA world. Yeah. So maybe different perspective relative to starting in your role in special operations. But Eugene, is there sort of a thing equivalent to that you would sort of imagine that's been that game changing? Or
I think in general, when it comes to AI and autonomy, I remember I was an undergraduate and we had a project where we tried to build a facial recognition system in hardware out of like 74 LS series logic, if anybody here knows what that is, right? Like breadwire, breadboard kind of a thing. Didn't finish it before the class was over. But we kind of understood what facial recognition was going to be like, right? And now you see how different it is, like just how well AI now works, whether it's generative AI with Stable Diffusion or GPT-3 or the facial recognition. And there's this element where quantity suddenly tips over to quality, where it becomes so cheap and so good that it really changes the equation. And I think, for me, it's easy sometimes as an engineer to underestimate when it transitions from that lab or something that's expensive and kind of at the cutting edge to now is ubiquitous, like that phone or autonomy in a cheap drone or something else.
Yeah, that kind of democratization of technology has really changed how we think about things. So, Admiral, this one is clearly for you. So this is sort of a command question. If you could only choose one, would you prefer exquisite mission planning, sort of technology that allows you to plan better, or advanced technology capabilities that you can take to the field? So kind of the beforehand or what you take with you.
I only get one?
I know.
That's not fair.
Who's thinking of these questions?
No,
I have a feeling if someone's got an idea that they really want to be talking to you about later.
I don't know if it's exactly mission planning, but I'll tell you what's on my mind a lot lately is we think about, we have to make investment decisions today that are going to, determine future capability. One area I'm interested in is in modeling and simulation, because I think about, mission planning today. We bring a staff together and we use our very regimented and proven military mission planning process. But really, we should be running, right, Monte Carlo scenarios. We should have simulations running 24/7, 365. If this, then this, and what does my force posture look, and what if I had this capability over here, and what was my adversarial's, if this, then what would my competitor's reaction be? Those sorts of things should be informing not just how we employ forces, but frankly, the kind of capability we are buying today, developing today for tomorrow to make sure it's relevant. And I think there's still huge opportunity in that space. So that would probably be one of my top priorities.
Absolutely. It's actually something on our wish list as well, because when one of our program managers comes in with a brand new idea, in a lot of cases it might be helpful to say, if this existed, let's play out a bunch of scenarios. And then that would allow us to determine how good it has to be to sort of make that huge difference that we're trying to make, or not at all, right? So, well, you mentioned transitioning technologies. Well, did you mention that? Well, we've been talking about transitioning technologies through commercial realms and things like this. when you talk about this kind of transition, does it present a challenge for transferring, for example, models that were developed with classified data? Again, do you have any thoughts on enabling things like this? Like, how do you move stuff out of very operational and classified realms where they can then ultimately transition into broader commercial or civil use?
Take a swing at that.
Yeah. So I think in many cases, the technology itself can be moved quite easily between the classification environments. You're right that if you train a model on classified data, that could be a problem. So we do work on that, and I think there's some interesting, actually, machine learning theoretical work that can be done in that space in terms of information theory kind of leakage between models. But we do have to, and this is an important thing to understand, we do have to be more careful in the near-peer environment when it comes to information than in the, in the previous set of conflicts. So, but we do think there's still a lot of opportunity to both transition technologies back out and to take commercial technologies and bring them in, as long as we're thoughtful about the, what information can move between domains.
Okay. So another audience question: it's getting harder and harder to hide. Harder to own the night, a lot of things where we were very dominant before. What are some of the biggest technological issues that your missions face in this changing world?
Yeah, great question. So it used to be that, SEALs had to maybe outthink or outmaneuver a guard dog, right? Today it's, unattended ground sensors, it's thermal, and all these things. I think one of the biggest technological issues we face today is our digital exhaust. Because we leave a trail, and it turns out that there's probably a lot of behaviors that everybody does that signal maybe intent, or think about how difficult it is to, I don't know, if you were going to get a battle group underway, or you could pick a range of things, right? Every time an aircraft takes off, there's a lot of things that upstream of that. How do you in this today's day and age, with all the tells, right? How does one obscure oneself? That's a really tough challenge. That is both a challenge, but also an opportunity. I mean, there's two sides to that, right? Mm-hmm. A great question.
No, absolutely. One that I think we're all wrestling with. So in this new world, especially, you talked about sort of being supported and supporting. How do you see the future of special ops collaborating with conventional forces, especially with things like systems interoperability, given kind of the different speeds and the nature of the things that you work with?
Yeah, these are really insightful questions. This is exactly the kind of things we're working on right now. As the special operation component of the Navy, it's really important that all my boats and my submersibles and all that thing help feed the Navy's common operating picture and their battle management systems and all that. We haven't really had to think about that in a long time. Really, all I cared about for a long time was, can I talk to that plane and get those bombs? And we're in a different place now. So that integration is, we actually have teams that are collaborating on that right now, and partnered with not just the Navy, the Joint Force, the Air Force, making sure all our crypto talks, all those things. Again, we view ourselves probably largely in support of the conventional forces. So the ability to talk, the ability to exchange data and make sure that ones and zeros can get from our platforms and our people into theirs, absolutely critical.
Absolutely. Well, to expand a little bit on what you were talking about before, I think with modeling and simulation, another audience question, do you see a role for virtual reality and augmented reality in planning and executing and maybe gaming out your missions?
Short answer, yes. No,
there we go. Next question.
Yeah, and to a degree, we're doing that. There's some of that taking place already. Probably the aviators are a little bit ahead of us, I would say, in the Navy in terms of their simulators and that sort of thing. But absolutely. In fact, I don't know, more than a decade now, I think we've been training with pilots remotely, not even pilots in planes, but in simulators, talking to what we call joint terminal air controllers, right? And they've been rehearsing. Our battle groups train now in simulation, synthetic, and it's actually a blend. Some of it's live, some of it's ships and aircraft, some of it's fake, but it's very real if you're just looking at a computer screen. And a lot of the people in the training simulations can't tell the difference.
Yeah. Yeah, so insider tips for live, virtual, constructive. That's like the phrase of the year within the Department of Defense. That's the combination of simulated and virtual and live all being put together sort of in these pieces. And it's really, you're right, it's really effective because you can scale and at the same time you're dealing with some of the real things there. So they were great questions and they were great answers and we ran out of time. So thank you.
Yes,
Thank you both for coming on stage with us and sharing with our audience. We really appreciate you joining us today. And can I just say on behalf of everybody, you know, all of the men and women of our armed services, you know, live lives of great sacrifice. Special Operations Forces in particular are in the fight every single day. So thank you, right? Thank you for what you do for us and for allowing us to have the safety and security to have this kind of a conversation today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.